Imagine a world where more women had the time to develop their genius. Welcome to She Rebel Radio, a community-driven podcast dedicated to supporting women to unlearn conventional rules and create their businesses of significance. This is our Feminine Power series with our headline partners NatWest. NatWest has been a pioneer in supporting women in business since the publication of the Rose Review. My name is Lulu Minns. I host retreats and create spaces for women leaders to explore their genius. And today I'm going to create that same space for you right here on this podcast episode. Welcome to episode 104 of She Rebel Radio, My Inexorable Power with Amanda Cotton. Amanda is a 3D designer and artist specialising in contemporary sculpture. Her portfolio has received international coverage in news articles, publications and interviews, including with the BBC. In 2020, Amanda was commissioned to design a sculpture of Anne Bonny and Mary Read, who were trailblazing and real-life 18th century pirates of the Caribbean who dressed and lived like men in order to make a living. Amanda graduated with a master's degree at Brighton back in 2013, and all will be revealed as to how and why we met at Lewes Football Club a few months ago. Amanda, it's amazing to have you here. And did I pronounce Inexorable correctly?
Hi, thank you for having me. Yes, you did. I know it's quite difficult. I listened to it on the Google quite a few times before I could get it right.
Same here. It's not a word that's in the English language very often, is it?
It's not, no. And I did a lot of research when they asked me to come up with a name for the sculpture. A lot of research to try and find the best name. And I liked it, obviously, one, because it means unstoppable. But two, because it almost sounds like the name of a ship as well. So that's why I went with it.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. And now to be a podcast episode. So
yeah.
Who were Anne Bonny and Mary Read?
So they were true life 17th century pirates. They were kind of both born as female, but their parents dressed them as males so that they could get benefits. They eventually found themselves as boys at the time on pirate ships, and they continued to pretend that they were boys so that they could stay on there and live the life of pirates.
Amazing. And when you say dressed as boys to get the benefits, is that to like kind of go out and work and make money and
yes
families?
Yes.
Amazing. And how did the commission of the sculpture come to you? And was it in 2020?
Yes, it was in 2020, so during lockdown. They approached me. It was for a kind of a press piece around the audiobook of Hellcats. So Inexorable is based on that particular audiobook about Anne and Mary. And I designed it to kind of showcase their personalities rather than what they looked like. So yeah, that's what it's based on.
Yeah, amazing. And what an interesting piece of work to come to you in 2020 when we were in lockdown.
It was, yes. But it was an interesting one because obviously doing a commission like this, we worked with lots of different people, historians, as well as other people that helped me create it and design it and 3D print it. And we did all of that over Zoom. So it was interesting, a very different process.
Yeah, so a process that you'd not worked in that way before.
Yes, exactly.
And how many people would you say were involved in the commission and from start to, the actual sculpture being born, as it were?
I think there was about 15 or 20 of us in total.
Amazing. And what did you find out about Anne and Mary in your research? And as we've heard, you've called the sculpture Inexorable, which means unstoppable. What else was it about that word that you thought was so interesting? How did you even find the word as well?
Well, through reading the script for the audiobook, for me, it wasn't really about what they looked like. It was about who they were. Mm-hmm. And for me, the metaphor of kind of fire, earth, air, and kind of that water came through to me very strongly, and how Anne very much represented that fire, and Mary represented earth, I wanted them to go in the water so that the water would flow through them like it did their veins.
Yeah.
And I wanted the air, that kind of sea air, to flow through them as well. So that was a huge thing for me. So when I was researching to try and find a word, I wanted it to be around that kind of vibe as well. And their love for one another was unstoppable. What they kind of achieved and the way that they went about lives, their own lives, was unstoppable. They didn't stop for anyone or anything. And I read a passage around volcanoes and how they're unstoppable. When the lava kind of erupts, nothing can stop it. So that's kind of where it came from, really. Their love for one each other. And, they're individually, they're strong, independent women, but when they come together, they're kind of this unstoppable machine, which is incredible.
So they were in a relationship with each other whilst having their adventures in the seas and doing what pirates did in the 17th, 18th century.
Yes. So as far as the audiobook goes, yes, they were. I don't know if that's 100% true that they were actually in a relationship, but they did have a very strong bond and love for one another. Yes.
And how did you said, I think, Anne, you've used the element of fire and Mary, the element of earth. And it's interesting, isn't it? It's kind of like the water, the sea air that runs through their veins kind of brings them together. But how did their personalities differ in the element of fire and earth? What was it that you found out particularly about them individually that made you, because earth is kind of very grounding, isn't it? It's very grounded, Mother Earth, etc. And then fires, much more, can be much more destructive.
Yes. So for me, Mary was kind of methodical. She had a very layered personality. She kind of came across in a way that, like you said, grounded. And for me, that kind of brought that earth kind of representation. She thought about everything that she did. She was calculated. She never acted on impulse at all. She also, in the book, was lashed over, I think it's like over 100 times on her back. And because she was hiding the fact that she was a woman and had breasts, she wasn't able to seek medical attention. So the scars kind of left huge lacerations on her back and left her with a big scar. So for me, that kind of, I imagined it would look like a mountain and kind of very jagged and hard and things. So that's kind of where her symbol came from. And that is why the earth symbol for Mary is across her back. So it really kind of highlights that section of her body and her strength that she went through when that happened. And then
what can I ask what is Mary made out of? They did you use different materials?
Oh, I did, yeah. So it is overall made of concrete. But Mary is kind of very grey and black. She wasn't necessarily very feminine, so I didn't want to put any kind of jewels or things like that in her. So she's quite plain. The concrete changes colour slightly. As it goes up, it's almost like stacked to represent that kind of layered personality that she had. And they're all, each layer is very precise. So they go up the same kind of thickness of layer, again, to represent that personality of hers. And then she also, the way that she was configured, she was meant to have quite broad shoulders to represent that kind of earthness. And she kind of comes in and out slightly as well to represent kind of the structure of a mountain.
Amazing.
But for me, I think Mary, in my head, reminds me of Miss Trunchbull from Matilda. And that's why she kind of had that bun in her hair kind of vibe that I went with.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that. And do those, when you get the kind of other, I don't know, female role models, icons, do they just come to you in the creative process, or do you do research or mood boards, or?
They do in a way come to me, but I do like a lot of research. I'm a very visual person. So yeah, I see things and then research them. I did do a lot of mood boards, yes, and collected images, things I saw kind of from day to day, and collected things about myself. There's bits and pieces of me that I saw in both of them that kind of appeared here and there. So yeah.
Yeah, amazing. And tell us more about Anne and her element of fire.
So Anne was completely the opposite to Mary. She was very unpredictable. She had loads of fire in her belly and would act on impulse in seconds.
Mhm.
Um, I wanted her to be a lot more curvaceous in her kind of form to kind of represent that fire. So if you was to light a match, it kind of has that curvaceous form. So that's why her figure is slightly more curvaceous
Mhm.
and fluid, to represent the flame of a match. The flames like that are in her belly obviously are to represent that fire that she had in her belly. And
Mhm.
then she's got this long, luscious hair, which is kind of fiery as well in itself, said in the script that she had long, luscious red locks. So that was quite important to me.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
she was slightly more feminine to Mary in the fact that halfway through her life, she did decide that she wanted to be a female. So she wore lots of silk dresses. She would wear loads of jewelry, so gems and stones and shiny things. She had a bit of a magpie characteristics, and a love for luxurious clothing. So it was important that Anne became that kind of a little bit more twinkly than Mary. And she
Mm.
has kind of like a red burnished vibe as well to go with it.
Yeah, lovely. Yes, you can really see the fire and the fluidity, and more on the feminine side with the gems and everything like that. And were they both born in Ireland? Were they Irish or British or?
Um, I'm not an expert,
No.
but off the top of my head, I think Anne was born in Ireland, but Mary was British. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, I was
Don't
going to
quote me
say,
on
I,
that.
I think one of them is Irish and
Yeah,
one of them.
but Anne was actually born into money. She came from a very wealthy family.
Okay, interesting. Um, So, and did you have any role models that were an inspiration for Anne's kind of personality?
For me, what stood out was kind of, like I said, that kind of impulseness. So she reminded me a lot of Jenny from Forrest Gump.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen most people have seen that film, especially when Jenny's kind of on the ledge and she thinks she's a bird and she wants to fly off. That's kind of the vibe that I imagined Anne Bonny to have.
Yeah, brilliant. Love it. And what do you feel the sculpture shows us about feminine power? What does that term even mean to you? And how can Anne and Mary inspire us as women to be unstoppable?
Um, well, the whole point of the statue is to kind of inspire everybody. So not just females, but everyone to be themselves, and be truly who they want to be, just like Anne and Mary did. Um, I mean, Karen from Lewis FC, she said that the sculpture actually makes her, when she looks at it, because of its size, stand up a bit taller.
Mm.
And that makes me feel very honored because that's the vibe I wanted. I want people to look at it and think, they're powerful and feel empowered from it. And I think that's what feminine power should be able to do. It should empower females, yes, but everybody. We should be able to show our power and that anything is possible.
Mm. Yeah, including that, physical form in terms of how we stand and wearing what we want to wear and representing what we want to represent.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when we were looking at the sculpture and how they should stand, I had to look at loads of different poses, whether they were going to have their legs open, whether their arms were going to be on their hips or in the air, a little bit like the Statue of Liberty. We looked at all different things like that. But for me, I felt that there was more power in them just standing kind of gently, stood still. There's enough power in that. It doesn't need to be a stance or anything like that. We're powerful generally in our nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Karen, one of the directors from
Mm.
Lewis FC. How did Inexorable find itself at Lewis FC, and what's the relevance?
So originally the Inexorable was going to be created and taken to Burr Island in Devon. But unfortunately the councils down there decided that pirates weren't for them. So we kind of had to do a little bit of a detour. It was originally a commission, but the original owners kindly gifted me the sculpture. So I'm now the full owner of it, which was an incredible thing to happen to me.
Yeah.
So I got to decide where I wanted to put it. And I wanted to find them a sense of kind of belonging and where they would feel at home. And like I said, inspire everybody from females, males, kind of the LGBTQ committee, lots and lots of different communities of people. And Karen was one of the first people to come forward, and we had a conversation. It all just felt right. Like what they have achieved at Lewes FC is incredible. And yeah, it just felt right.
Yeah, that they very much represent and depict that equality FC, don't they? And
yes,
and Anne and Mary are now, I think they were delivered over the wall at the football ground, and are now to the some of the food vans, and you can, and really surveying the pitch.
Yeah, it kind of, the day they got installed was nerve-wracking. The sculpture weighs 7 tons. Oh no, sorry, it's 7 foot and it weighs a ton. So lifting it over the wall was eventful, but we got there. But yeah, it kind of like looks like they've kind of snuck in through the back gate and are watching the match, which is lovely. And it's interesting because actually for me, the back of the sculpture is the front, whereas at Lewes FC, it's kind of the front of the sculpture. Their front is now the front of the sculpture looking out the pitch. So it's kind of allowed me to look at the sculpture in a completely different way as well, which is great.
Yeah, all about that changing perspective. So originally the design was, I guess, that they were in the water with their backs and people would see them from behind unless they were in a ship, maybe.
Yes, that was the plan, because the idea was that, you know, they loved their life at sea. Whenever they were on land, they felt uncomfortable. So I wanted the idea to be that their backs were towards kind of land and that they were in their happy place.
Amazing. And as you said, you're not an expert in terms of everything that happened to Anne and Mary, but how did their kind of adventures end? And were they, as so often 17th, 18th century, probably quite young when they died or stopped being pirates, as it were?
Well, they were actually captured. Anne had been captured previously, but she escaped. But they were captured again. Both of them, from what I understand, said that they were pregnant because then they couldn't be executed. Mary, unfortunately, died. I don't know if it was in prison or not, but there is no kind of evidence of the child or anything like that. Anne escaped, and again, we don't know when she died or what happened to her after that.
Wow.
But there are, you know, lots of articles out there that say lots of different things. And I have actually been contacted by someone recently who is a descendant of the Bonny family. So I'm looking forward to catching up with them to understand what they've learned along the years.
Yeah, and how these stories, when they're so old, kind of change, and there's a number of different narratives to kind of weave through as well.
Yes.
Which is so interesting.
Yeah.
And do we know why, in terms of Anne Bonny, if she was born into a family of money, why potentially, you know, her role in being a pirate and being on ships, if it wasn't for financial need, as so often was the case when families would dress their children as boys, was because, you know, instead of marrying them into a rich family or a family of money, would be that they actually needed to go out and earn any money. Has there been any narrative around that?
I think there's lots of different stories. What I understand is that she was a bit of a rebel, and she was actually due to get married, or she did get married, and she didn't like that kind of decision or that confinement potentially, so she ran off to escape from it.
Oh wow, yeah, have that freedom on the sea. Amazing. So
there's also the go on.
No,
I was going to say the idea that in a lot of the history books and all the images that there are of Anne and Mary out there, they've always got the kind of breasts out, which I find quite interesting. Whereas there's no kind of truth in the fact that they did have their breasts out all the time, but they're always drawn in history as if they did. So I always find that quite interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. And if it's that they were having to, you know, and to dress up as boys and men to be on the ships, it's probably unlikely that they had, you know, their feminine nature kind of out for all to see. But there's lots of interesting conversation. I was reading something the other day about you know, women in sculptures and statues, and what is shown and what isn't, and whether that's whether that's okay and whether it isn't. And I think is it the Mary Wallenstein sculpture statue a couple of years ago was kind of, there was a lot of discussion around that, although it wasn't supposed to be her. It was feminine in nature, of that, you know, should she have her breasts exposed, or is that objectifying women, or, you know, but then a lot of older sculptures of men tend to be naked and showing a lot more than women do, in terms of, you know, vulvas and vaginas aren't ever shown. So it's interesting, isn't it? What's power, what isn't.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a big topic of conversation when we were designing the sculpture as well, just the same as their stance on whether or not that was going to be a feature. But I decided that they would both kind of be non-binary. So you wouldn't necessarily know if they were either way.
Yeah, it's kind of then open to interpretation, isn't it, as to how they want to or potentially need to be perceived.
Exactly. Yeah.
At that time. And is it ever a fluid, you know, it's always a fluid thing. And I think that's where definitely Lewis FC and you know, there's a lot more acceptance around that masculine and feminine energy can be very fluid, which you depict so well within that. And so with the you know, many people that were kind of involved in the commission of that the last say is with you, but you have people to support you in terms of the discussion and research. Is that kind of how this kind of works?
No, not anymore. So when I became the owner, I took over all responsibility for kind of all of that side of it, doing all the planning permissions and deciding where it goes, kind of all the project management of it came over to me. So I do all of that now, as well as being an artist. Learned a lot in the last couple of years, writing contracts and all sorts of other things.
A whole load of business planning around Anne and Mary and where they go and where they belong next.
But I still do have a group of people that helped me create it. My studio in London is quite small, so I don't know if you've heard them, but Studio 43 helped me design kind of the CAD drawings and 3D print it and helped me build it all and did all of that for me, which was incredible. And then we had another company that helped me do all the structural calculations and make sure all the insides, you know, for wind and public liability and all those kind of things was all done as well. So I still work closely with them.
There's so much more, you know, complexity behind, you know, this kind of thing than people see at face value. And just rewinding back to our earlier, you know, conversation, we're talking about statues, sculptures, then it is that I think the statistic is something around like 90% of statues and sculptures in Britain anyway, in public squares, are men, and only about 10% are women. Do you think that impacts us as women, and is bringing the female form to the public eye a particular interest in your work? What other pieces have you been working on? Although I know that you've mentioned that they are, you know, and I think potentially were the first, you know, kind of non-binary sculptures where that is open to interpretation.
Yes. So I actually read a fact a little while ago, and there's more animal sculptures in London than there are women.
Oh wow.
Which is quite intense.
Very intense.
And to think that like there's no representation of the LGBTQ committee either. So yeah, that I think before I started this sculpture, maybe I hadn't really necessarily noticed. In my personal life, I've also started doing quite a few tours around London to learn a little bit more about its history and kind of all those nooks that you walk past but don't actually appreciate most of the time. So, and in doing that, I have come across quite a few female sculptures, like the Florence Nightingale one. I walk past that all the time, but never actually stop and appreciate it. But yeah, it is on my mind now. since doing this sculpture, and how it's inspired so many people, and how I want Anne and Mary to kind of be as famous as their counterparts. Women on ships, it was always stereotypical that we were seen as bad luck. But actually, if Anne and Mary hadn't been buried in history, then maybe that wouldn't be a stereotype. Maybe we would not have been seen as unlucky, or we wouldn't just be the figurehead. We could have been very, very present. So I think it's about finding these buried stories and bringing them to life, and making everyone know that actually history as it's currently written maybe isn't fully telling us the truth.
Yeah, it's a really one-sided perspective, isn't it? And I'd forgotten that, actually, that women being on a ship, potentially are being seen as bad luck. Yet, ships were often, or boats are often named after women as well, but it's that objectification. And Pirates of the Caribbean, the film Enterprise has been massive and so successful, and it's been years since I've seen it, but I don't think there are any female pirates, are there? That the women are kind of flung about like they are in those kind of things.
Yeah, which again goes back to your other question of why was Lewis FC the place to put it. Football, women aren't seen as footballers, so for me that was really important kind of aspect of giving it to Lewis FC as well, in that kind of way. Women can be whatever we want, whether we want to be footballers, pirates, electricians, whatever we want, and men the same. Men can be ballet dancers or whoever they want to be. It's really important to be who you want to be. But in terms of kind of what I'm doing at the moment, so going back to your question, I, back in lockdown, when I thought I didn't have anything to do until Inexorable came about, I sculpted myself out of clay. I usually teach a lot of ceramic workshops, so I couldn't teach at the time. So I decided to sculpt myself out of ceramics. And it became a very personal kind of journey for me. I never really thought of myself as unconfident, but kind of all my insecurities very much came out whilst I was doing the sculpture. And what I thought was going to take about 2 weeks ended up taking 3 months. And I built a life-size replica of myself by measuring every 10 centimeters and then kind of sculpting it. Didn't use any mirrors or anything like that because I couldn't bear the thought of it. So I did it all kind of just by measuring with string. And then when I did it, I was moving studios so I could afford a slightly bigger space. And I had to quickly take a mold of it. So then I had a mold of this sculpture of me. And what I've decided to do from that is I'm going to do 100 different forms of this sculpture. So it'll be the same form, but each one's going to be a different material, a different collaboration, and a different process. They've kind of started as me, but now as each one takes on a different material and a different collaboration, they're kind of changing personalities. Each one is different. Some of them kind of look more non-binary, others kind of look more childlike. They're all very different. So I'm going to do 100 of them. One, to kind of develop my own skills. I'm hoping by the time I've done 100, I'll be really good at internal armatures because I want them all to stand. And structural calculations.
There.
But yeah, I did one. The biggest one I've done so far, I've done 7 in total. But the biggest one I did was made out of birdseed. So it was kind of a 5 foot. I'm only quite short, but it was 5 foot. Kind of a huge fat ball, basically, in my form. And I fed it to some local wildlife in London. And the animals there ate it within 3 weeks. So,
did you take
from top to bottom?
Did you take photos of it gradually demising?
Yeah, we did a full time lapse for the full 3 weeks. So it's kind of about my vulnerabilities of, showcasing myself in my naked form. Whether people realize it's me or not, it's still kind of in my mind that I know it technically is, but also other people's vulnerabilities of looking at a sculpture, and it is a person, whether it kind of looks male, female, or non-binary, it is a person, and seeing how people interact with it, and animals interact with it when it's made from lots and lots of different materials and things like that.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, so it's definitely that vulnerability and feeling of exposure, but then also, and we talk about this quite a lot on She Rebel, and particularly this series, that connection of us as all people, but as well as us as women with nature. And I think sometimes, people kind of miss, that we are all made of the same thing. So I love that you made yourself out of a fat ball.
Yeah.
Got eaten by the birds and then pooped back out probably on the land. And it's important that we maintain that connection. And I think you probably had one of the most interesting lockdowns that unfolded in terms of making sculptures of yourself and famous pirates that, Anne and Mary, and I'm sure there were probably other women that were, as we say, those stories that have been buried, that is so important to be pulled out to kind of understand more of our narrative and where it is that we do come from and what we really are capable of.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Well said.
So, Amanda, it's amazing to have you here. And do we know how long Anne and Mary are going to be at Lewes Football Club? Because it's a really good excuse for our listeners to get to a match of either the women's team or the guys' team, and B, to see the sculpture there.
Yeah, well, as you've already said, you just have to go to the grounds, watch a match, and you can see Inexorable there. It will be there for a season. So not permanently. We are still looking for a permanent home for Inexorable. Ideally, because it was designed to be by the water, that's where I would like it to go. Yeah. And I think they'll feel kind of at home there. But that's not to say that, they can't go on tour first. They could go to lots of other communities and things like that. But I know that I want it to go to a community kind of by the water somewhere. Is its final resting place. But whether that's in a year, 2 years, 10 years, who knows?
Yeah, there may be,
as long as it inspires.
Yeah, definitely. And there may be an adventure that they're meant to go on before they find that place of belonging and home, as many of us do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being with us, Amanda. We will put your details in the show notes so people can find out more about you and your incredible work.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great. Thank you. And giving Anne and Mary the attention they deserve. So thank you.
Absolutely. You've been listening to She Rebel Radio. It's been an honour to support you taking the time to discover more of your genius, and we thank our partners NatWest for supporting this series. If you'd like to attend a retreat or work with me, please visit lulumins.com, and don't forget to join us in furthering the conversation on social media. Just search for NatWest Business or Lulumins in Google and on all social media platforms.